Yeah, so slow living, I would say a lot of the intentional living pieces actually started while I was still fully employed. So I have this period. So crisis is late 2015. It was like a 6 week, like acute portion of a crisis, although you could never put a dead end on it, right? But that was really the acute portion that kicked off everything for me. And then the following 2.5 years, I was still fully employed. And those were actually rougher years than the crisis itself, because over those 2.5 years, I just kept learning everything I could about myself and about life, and about humanity. And I just was gaining all this new, not just knowledge, but new perspective, which makes sense in the context of ego development theory. But I was gaining all this new perspective in terms of these are things I'm learning about myself and life, yet I'm still living the same way that I had been living. And I'm still showing up to my 9 to 5 job and still doing this thing that I don't feel is purposeful. And that was what I call an increasing period of cognitive dissonance until it reached a breaking point in mid 2018 and something had to give. But in terms of the intentional living and slow living pieces, those were things that I started to adopt as soon as I discovered them. So in 2016 and 17, while I was still fully employed, in my free time, I would experiment with things like decluttering. And I even did like Marie Kondo's thing. And I discovered digital minimalism. This was like pre-Cal Newport writing the book on digital minimalism. The very first post on the Slow website was in mid 2017, and it was about digital minimalism. So I was trying to adopt all of these things really as like a cure or antidote for the life that I had been living. So the way that I like to think about it is in terms of people have an idea of what minimalism is or simple living even, and how it relates to your physical things or your stuff, your built environment around you. What slow living is it's kind of an underappreciated or well-known concept because it is kind of the equivalent of the time aspect of your life. So you've got simple living on one hand, which is about your things, and then you've got slow living on the other hand, which is about your time. And both of them are about your relationship with those things, right? So you have your relationship with your space and your relationship with your time. Or another way to describe it is a relationship with your space, like your actual environment, and then a relationship with your pace of life. So those are kind of just quick hand ways to remember both sides of the coin. But I kind of consider them two sides of one coin of intentional living, where you've got both aspects that you can look at. And once you start thinking about your relationship to time and busyness and why we all feel like we're so busy, it's really an eye-opening thing that leads to more questions in terms of why am I so busy in the first place? What is driving this busyness? And I have a post series on the Slow website that I did a couple years ago that kind of dives into the busy epidemic today. But yeah, that's how I got started with it. And it's just been little, experiments and phases along the way where I've tried some decluttering stuff, some minimalism stuff, embraced some downshifting, voluntary simplicity, all of these types of concepts, including, lifestyle design. If I could design the perfect day, what would that look like? All of these types of things have kind of factored into little pieces of the intentional living journey along the way.
Yeah, I'm actually curious about if you were to design your perfect day, what would that look like?
It actually looks exactly how it currently looks, and it took years, right, to even realize this, that the whole dream of sipping cocktails on a beach isn't for me. And it took me a long time to realize that, though, right? Because that's kind of the meme that's planted in people's heads. And the goal that people are striving for is like this financial independence, number on a screen kind of thing. But for me, it's like, I don't even think about retirement. Retirement isn't something that I want to do. I want to just keep living how I'm living as long as possible and then just make money as a byproduct of that. But it always comes with meaning first, right? So meaning before money, purpose before profit, self-development before business development. That's kind of the ethos of what I've adopted. And yeah, so for me, the perfect day is pretty much what I'm currently living. I just want to keep doing that as long as I can. But it took a long time, right, to realize that I'm more interested in lifelong learning than I am in traveling the world. I'm more interested in lifelong learning than I am in just, consuming entertainment. For me, the lifelong learning is the play. It is the fun. And so, if someone were to stand outside my door and just observe me every day, they'd be like, wow, you work a ton. You're just constantly working and reading and like doing all this stuff. But what they consider work is what I consider play. And who wouldn't want to be playing all the time?
Yeah, that's interesting what you just said, because that was kind of the next question that I wanted to ask is related to what you're saying. And I think one of the things we have in common is our insatiable curiosity for learning and reading. And I know myself at any given time, I'm kind of bouncing around through a half a dozen books. And I'm just curious, how does the amount of content you create and the amount of reading you do fit into slow living? Like I imagine like slow living would somehow entail slowly consuming a book and like really living with it, which at the same time feels to me somehow in opposition to being able to create so much content and learn so many ideas. So how does the amount of content you create and the amount of reading you do fit into this notion of slow living?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when people hear slow living, first of all, the word slow in general usually has a negative connotation, right? So that's kind of a fun thing that kind of kicks people's curiosity off in terms of, well, I always thought slow was a bad thing, right? But in terms of slow living, there are a ton of myths and misconceptions about what the concept even entails. So a couple of them, just to quickly name them off, are like that a lot of people would think that it means living life as slowly as possible, like you're living in slow motion. You're actually physically moving slowly between everything that you do, which isn't the case. Then you've got the other thing where, if you search hashtag slow living on Instagram or Pinterest or something like that, you're going to get this very curated, neutral tone, earthy tone aesthetic, muted colors, that whole deal. And sure, that can be like slow living as an aesthetic, but what I'm referring to is slow living as a lifestyle. So there's a big difference between the aesthetic and the lifestyle. That's the other piece of it. Another piece is that slow living is anti-technology, which isn't the case. The big thing that it comes down to, if you want to use like different synonyms for it, it's almost like instead of calling it slow living, you could call it mindful living or deeper living or more holistic living or more purposeful living, more paced living. So it's again going back to that relationship with time itself. And so it's not a matter of doing less just for the sake of doing less. It's a matter of making trade-offs intentionally, almost like what minimalism is, or like what I said was simple living is for your stuff. It's like you're approaching your priorities in life, you're approaching what matters most to you in life in a way where you're intentionally and consciously putting certain things on the back burner so that you can go big on the things that matter most to you. So in terms of what that means for reading, I've always been, it's kind of ironic, I've always been a slow reader. Like I actually am just thorough and methodical and in general slow. I always got bad grades in reading growing up because I would never finish tests before the time ran out. So it's funny because growing up, I always considered reading a weakness for myself, and I was never a big reader. And really, I haven't become a reader since my adult life in my 30s. Through all this existential crisis and learning, it just so happens that the best ideas are trapped in books. And so you kind of have to go through this process of going through books and pulling out all of those key insights and nuggets that you can then connect across books and across authors and things like that. But in terms of reading, there's a great book called How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler. And he talks about, it's not a matter of reading slowly only or speed reading only. It's a matter of reading enough that you know when to read quickly or skim or even skip portions of a book or even quit a book if it's not for you at the right moment. Like you said, you have, a dozen books on rotation at any given time. I'm kind of similar in terms, I probably have like 3 to 6 on rotation at any given time where depending on your mood or what is drawing your energy in a certain direction, you can flip between them. But the more you read, the better you become as a reader, right? And you know when to speed read, you know when to read slowly, you know when to reread something because it just seems like that insightful or it articulates something in a way that you couldn't before. So it's kind of a matter of this whole idea of quality through quantity. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at it.